Now lately I've really been wanting to get back into my 86 GMC square body here. It's kind of been cocooned inside a whole bunch of garbage, as usually happens, but I've really been deliberating on what engine to put back in this thing. Now this is the original 305 that I kind of dolled up to look like something from the 60s. It's got that alpine green paint on it, and I put some goodies on it like a cam with a matching intake on it, and I have an Edelbrock carburetor, ram horn headers. You guys have probably seen this before. But here lately, since I've got that engine horde hauled home, I had some options to do something special. Now most normal guys would just order a 350 crate engine or maybe go get a salvaged LS motor, but I'm not normal. I'm more like an 80 to 100-year-old trapped in a 40-year-old body. The older the better for me. Now I'm going to put a 5.3 liter back in it, but it's going to be this 1962 327 variety. Now the only challenge is that this thing at some point in its life, long ago, was absolutely beat to death. So can I save it without having to spend thousands at a machine shop? I don't know. Let's go find out. Can already see we have two pistons, number 5 and number 8. The reliefs are different. They don't have a notch to show you front, so that'll be kind of interesting to see. I wonder why they would have put two different pistons in. Probably just what they had. And if need be, I do have a new set of sealed power 30 over pistons sitting right here. You want to use a good clean rag for this. Yeah, there's a lot of crud between the pistons and the cylinder wall. This thing has been sitting open, I wouldn't doubt, for 50 years. Maybe 40, I don't know. Okay, we're going to unleash engine power with the original MMO. Oh my. Hello. Too much. Alright, I'm going to let that soak for a good 5 or 10 minutes. Let it seep its way down all the way to the oil rings. Get them all lubricated. And then we will wipe out the excess. Flip it over. Do the same thing on the other bank. You probably don't need to see that. Then we'll flip the engine upside down and start taking apart the bottom end. Hey, I told you wrong. This thing is not bored 30 over. When I set my bore gauge up 4 inches, this is a vintage Hastings bore gauge. That's just how I roll, if you haven't figured that out yet. Got her set to 4 inches, which was the original bore on a 327. And you can see the bore is on 40 thousandths. The ridge is maybe 1/1000 smaller. I think we can live with that. Well, I have everything ready that I can do for extraction. The top end of my pistons and the cylinders and the rings are as oiled as I can get them. The main caps are stamped, numbered already, so are the rod bearing caps and rods, so I don't have to do any of that to keep it in line. Now I'm going to try to keep from having to rotate this thing as much as I possibly can. I expect I may have to rotate it slightly, but I really want to avoid that because there's probably not much oil left in the bearings and because of all the crud that could potentially be in there. So I'm going to do my best to not do that. And I'm going to go get a socket, some short pieces of hose, a dead blow, and we'll start popping these things out of there. Now admittedly, there is one thing I wish I could retain from the 305, and that is the one-piece rear main seal. But if we do our job right, that's not going to be an issue anyway. Otherwise, I am perfectly content using a much older engine. And I just dropped a nut. Well, the news isn't great. It's not as bad as it could be, but it's not great. Now, I should have known we might run into a problem when we see the condition of the cam bearing. And just a couple of the worst ones that I've found here. You can see these parallel lines going with the journal here. That's on number 7, and number 4 was another one I noticed right there. Pretty visible lines, and I can feel them. So, I mean, a guy can try polishing this himself, and he might get lucky and get most of it out, or I can send it in and get it taken care of right. I really wanted to avoid that on this project. So as far as the bearings themselves, as far as number 7, this is what it looks like. It's got some lines in it, some discoloration, and then several of them. This is from number 6. Have dark spot in one spot. This would be the cap side, so the no load side. And they are Cleveite 77s. They are the standard size. So I imagine this was an old school there you can see Cleveite 77, CB 745P. This is standard size bearing yet, so we would have room to play with this crankshaft if we needed to. But I guess as to be expected with an old 327, this was probably a once often high revving engine, and judging by the outside of the block, had inadequate oil towards the end. And it's not like I could blame a guy. I mean, when that newfangled thing called a Mustang pulled up to the red light, it's go time. Well, we're just going from bad to worse news here. Number one is probably the worst main on here. Very obvious deep groove. I can catch my fingernail on there. There's what the bearing looks like. And on top of it all, it's already been ground 30 over. Or 30 under, so the bearing's 30 over. So, probably will not want to reuse this crankshaft. I mean, a guy could make it work, and he could make it run, and it would probably run just fine, but I don't like it. Being my own vehicle, there again, I could live with it. Just polish these up, slap new 30 over bearings in it. But that's a pretty good groove. So, plan 2. So I had this other block marked 327 truck, and there was a little bit of confusion on my part because of the number stampings. Not that you care to know this, but the casting number is 3782870, which is an exact twin to the 327 we're working with. But the stamped number on the machine boss here is F0307UA. So that's Flint, March the 7th, but UA under 327 does not compute. We just get an error screen. UA suffix code actually comes up as a 307, at least as far as I can find out. I'm no expert on these things. So I was never really 100% confident whether or not I had a 307 or a 327. Now certainly the bore measured out at 4 inches, so I was pretty confident it was a 327, but just didn't know. So I pulled it off the shelf, and our crank has a casting number 3782680, which is a 327 small journal crankshaft number. Hello? So guys, I know what you're probably thinking. Most guys would probably almost forget completely about this block at this time. It's got mismatched pistons. The crank has already been ground. Every single bearing has been beat to death. I mean, this car was run hard. Probably low on oil, probably high RPM. Just forget about it. I've got another 327 here. And I had these thoughts last night. I was very tempted for a few minutes to strip this down today, run it to the machine shop, let them bore it 30 over and be done with it. But the thing I did not want to do was sink a couple grand into this engine. This has always been about seeing if I could get a 327 that has probably been sitting for 40, 50 years, get it going as cheap as possible, throw it in the truck, and go with it. Now it's my own truck. It's just a fun secondary vehicle. This is having fun, and I wanted to see if I could do it as cheap as possible. I always have the 305 on backup, or we could put whatever we want in it. Or I can keep this bad boy around, and if this thing poops out on us, I can put that one in. So I'm still sticking with the original plan. I should probably weigh the two different pistons and see the difference, but they are on opposite sides of the crank, so it should balance out somewhat. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop this crank out, we're going to measure it, see what it looks like. We'll throw it in here, and away we'll go, I hope. Now you probably don't need to see me disassemble a whole nother block on this video anyway. Okay, got both cranks out. The one with the red on it is from the block that we've been taking apart. This one is from the second 327 block. Same crank, but very different measurements. So I'm calling this one the old one and this one the new one. Both of these would have had mains originally from factory 2.30 mains, and the rod journals at 2 inches even. Now we knew these mains were ground 30 under, and the measurements bear that out. They're a couple thousandths under that yet. All of them were 268 except for number 4, which was 270. I don't know why that one was so special, but it was. And then all the rods, like I said, it should be at 2 inches originally. They were all at 1.979 or 21 thousandths under what they originally would have been. Now, the new crank, again, mains should be at 230 from factory. Everything was either 299, or in other words, 2.299 or 2.298. So 1 to 2 thousandths under factory spec. And the rods were consistent all the way through, 1 thousandths under factory spec. So 1.999. So that crank is going to work just fine for us. I'm going to have to polish it up, which is no problem. Get standard bearings. We'll plastic gauge it. We will probably slap a dial indicator on it. Make sure everything's working good. No out of round or anything. Evidently this engine was treated just a little bit nicer. So I'm glad I had this second block sitting around. I did not want to pay $500 for a good used 327 crank. Well guys, at this point I'm not going to bore you with showing you everything I do to clean, making you sit through all that. So what I like to do, I'm here at work, I've got the blessing of a heated wash tank. So I've run this through there, and that does an excellent job of getting the majority of the crud from the years gone by off of this thing. I've wiped out the cylinders with brake clean and a scuff pad. Got all the rust out of them. They're looking good. I see nothing too concerning at this point. On large flat areas and areas of the casting, outside casting that I can get to, I like using a die grinder with a stiff wire brush. Just watch out, fellers. Take care of your eyeballs. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. All the parts, the nooks and crannies that you can't easily get to with anything else. Then I like to use a needle scaler to get all old paint, all the rust, anything like that off of there. And any remaining crud, oil, grease, all that good stuff. Like to use a small wire brush, brake clean, mineral spirits. I would recommend gasoline, but unfortunately society is no longer smart enough to use that in cleaning anything. So I'm sorry, that's off limits. Then at that point I'm going to knock out the freeze plugs. I will get a bore brush in a drill and shine up the passages for the lifters, take it back to the pressure washer at the other shop, clean everything off inside and out, coolant passages, oil passages, everything that I've cleaned, get all the dirt and junk off. Then I will blow everything off, dry it off as well as I can, all the machine surfaces, coat them with oil, the cylinders, the lifter passages, anything like that that needs to be protected with oil, I will do that. Then we'll mask, then we'll paint. Okay, I have been cleaning for a while, and I ended up wearing the majority of what was on the block. I had to go in and wash up. It was awful, but we are looking so much better, and I found one more dirty little secret on this block that I wanted to show you. Hopefully it's the last one. It's cleaning the side here, and I found we have a weld. An old weld looks like it was done very well, but the block must have cracked. Now, I'm not terribly concerned about it. This engine we know was run and run hard, and this shows absolutely no sign of failure. I'm going to leave it like that, paint over it so I can still see it, keep an eye on it. And if I'm completely honest with you guys, as I find more defects and blemishes on this block, it's kind of like the more I'm connecting with it here, it's like a little mongrel puppy that you just start to love, you know. Who knows the history of this block? This could have been a track terror. This could have been the fastest car in town. A guy got this out every Saturday night and went to town drag racing. Who knows? Or it could have been just grossly abused and misused. But either way, I'm really starting to dig this thing as I find more and more problems with it. You can see it was once the light Chevrolet blue and then painted either red or orange. So I'm going to keep cleaning for a little bit while longer, then we will drive these cam bearings out. Now that I actually have them out and I look at them and can see them, yeah, they're all 5 are 100% shot. 100%. It's bad. Well, I do indeed believe we ran out of problems with the block, but it's not just going to let me off that easy. It just had one nasty little secret left for me. I turned my attention to the pistons, and it's not pretty. Let's see, one of the worst was number 6 here. And you can see all of them have some amount of scuffing on the piston skirts. This is one of the worst ones. I mean, it's just completely scraping it off there, deep old gouges there. Now I find this interesting. I think an old school trick to tighten old pistons back up in the cylinders was to knurl them. You old school guys that were around back in the good old days, let me know if that's correct, or if you think this pattern was already there from new. But I do know for a fact that back in the old days they used to knurl pistons to get them to tighten back up. So that is unfortunate and unwelcome news. That means pistons are in the future here. But I've got concern if I'm buying new pistons, what's that going to mean for clearance in these cylinders? So I set my mic for 40 over, and I set this modern style bore gauge at 0 for 40 over, so that when this is in here, then the gauge is at 0, and it is very consistently at 0, or actually gets smaller. So the smallest it goes would be 4.039, 1/1000ths under that 40 over, which means it must have been bored at 4.039 or 38, who knows exactly. So if I order a new set of seal power pistons, let's say they're 310 AP 40, a 40 over piston, they measure at the skirt at 4.03874. And they want a minimum clearance, the difference between the piston and the cylinder, of 1 thousandths. Now that actually seems a little bit small to me. Normally I think you'd want at least 2, if not 3, to compensate for expansion, but they're the experts, not me. So 1 thousandths difference. Basically what I'm saying is I don't have 1 thousandths difference as it is. At the smallest spot where these are the tightest, I am only a quarter of a thousandths bigger than the new pistons will be. Now, a lot of areas it's at 040, which would be a little over 1 thousandths. So that basically means I'm going to have to hone these pretty good and get an additional 3/4 of a thousandths out of them. Plus, I must say that this is good confirmation that that old Hastings bore gauge is pretty accurate. And I actually like using that old one more because that flat plate it has on the one side holds the gauge square to the cylinder better. This thing, you can just rock this thing all over the place. But I really enjoy using that old Hastings one. So the unfortunate news is this engine is thumbing its nose at me, sticking its little tongue out at me and say, "You're not getting by that cheap." Oh, I did not want to get into all this, but it is still cheaper than having an engine machined. So I'm going to have to save my pennies and nickels so I can invest in a new hone because mine is absolutely shot. Pistons, rings, all the bearings, expansion plug kit, and that'll get just the block, the short block, back together. Then we got to think about gaskets. I have a lot of ideas floating around in my mind about heads. Not sure what direction I'm going to go there. I'm certainly not going to spend $500 to $1,000 for a new pair of heads, although I would love to. I'm going to regret that kind of thing one of these days. Well, that's just about going to do it for this one. I've got all 8 cylinders honed, and they're all coming in at about 40 to 41 thousandths, with it, which is just perfect as far as I'm concerned, considering the minimum clearance that they want. Next, I'm going to take and degrease the whole thing, pressure wash everything out. I've already chased all my threads for the head bolts and everything else. So I'll use a pressure washer and blast all the dirt and grease and shavings out if it made any. Going to use my bore brush on the oil gallery, get that all nice and clean. I knocked out the plugs on the back, so I really need to concentrate on these water jackets because there's a lot of scale and rust inside of them. We need to get that all out. Just a really good deep cleaning on this thing, get all the grit from the honing out of there. Then coming up on the next one, we're going to put plugs back in it, tape it off, paint it. We'll put the new pistons on the connecting rods, throw the crank back in, put everything, all the pistons back in here. In other words, hopefully by the end of the next video, we are where we started at the beginning of this one, only with a much better looking and much happier engine. If you want to keep up with me on this project, be sure you subscribe and do all that other stuff, whatever that means. I am very honored that you've spent this time with me. I'm glad you did. I hope you've got just a little bit of entertainment out of it. And there's not much more to say other than God bless you guys. We will see you on the next one. It's okay. It was all just a bad dream.